Welcome to LPBW Update, your number one source for the stories happening behind the scenes of Little People, Big World. Today, we are diving into a story so shocking, so deeply personal, it threatens to shatter the fragile peace the Roloff family has built. This isn't about property lines or business disagreements. This is about a calculated act of emotional cruelty that, according to our inside sources, almost pushed Matt and Amy past the point of no return. What if the final battle for Roloff Farms wasn't fought with lawyers and contracts, but with blackmail? What if Caryn Chandler, in a desperate bid for control, held Amy's most precious memories hostage to force a lowball farm buyout? We have uncovered an exclusive report detailing a secret negotiation, a cruel ultimatum, and a family intervention that exposed a side of Caryn that even Matt Roloff never knew existed. This is the story of the hostage heirlooms. Before we expose this shocking and exclusive story that you won't hear anywhere else, please take a moment to support our channel. If you believe in uncovering the truth behind the headlines, hit that like button right now. And if you haven't already, subscribe to LPBW Update and ring that notification bell. We are committed to bringing you the most in-depth analysis and insider reports, and your support makes it all possible. Don't miss a single update. The fallout from this story is just beginning. Now, let's get into the dark truth of the farm buyout. To understand the gravity of this alleged incident, we must first understand what was at stake, not just for Amy's finances, but for her very soul. When Amy Roloff finally made the heart-wrenching decision to leave the farmhouse, the home where she had raised 4 children and lived for 3 decades, it was more than just a move, it was an amputation of her own history. The process was a whirlwind of emotional and logistical chaos. Boxes were packed, memories were sorted, and a lifetime was condensed into cardboard and packing tape. Amidst the turmoil, a few specific boxes, marked with her mother's maiden name, Knight, were moved to the attic for temporary storage, meant to be retrieved in a final sweep. But in the fog of exhaustion and farewells, that final sweep never happened. These weren't just any boxes. They contained the irreplaceable artifacts of a life lived before the farm, a life before the show, a life connected to the people who knew her not as a reality TV star, but simply as Amy. Inside one box were her mother's journals, leather-bound volumes filled with the elegant, looping script of a woman Amy had lost too soon. These pages held her mother's thoughts, her dreams, her struggles. They were a conversation Amy could still have with the woman who raised her. In another box, carefully wrapped, were her grandmother's recipe cards, not pristine, printed recipes, but handwritten notes on index cards, stained with flour, butter, and the phantom scents of decades of family dinners. Each card was a portal to her childhood kitchen, a direct link to the woman who taught her the love of baking. And then there were the photographs. Loose, black and white photos of her parents' wedding, faded color snapshots of her own childhood, images of a young woman full of hopes and dreams, long before a pumpkin patch in Oregon defined her world. These items were her anchor to her own identity. They were priceless, not in monetary value, but in sentimental worth. They were, in a very real sense, the last tangible pieces of her parents she had left. Months rolled by. Life in her new home with Chris began to take shape. The pain of leaving the farm started to dull, replaced by the quiet joy of building a new chapter. It wasn't until the first holiday season in her new house that the chilling realization struck. Amy, wanting to bake her grandmother's signature shortbread cookies, went to the bookshelf where she thought she had stored the recipe box. It wasn't there. A small knot of unease tightened in her stomach. She checked the storage closet, then the garage. The search grew more frantic, expanding from a simple hunt for a recipe into a desperate house-wide search for the night boxes. Chris joined in, trying to calm her, but as they opened box after box filled with farm memorabilia and everyday items, the truth began to dawn. The boxes weren't there. They had been left behind, left in the attic of a home that was no longer hers. A home now presided over by Matt and increasingly by Caryn. A wave of panic, cold and sickening, washed over Amy. Meanwhile, back on the farm, another drama was unfolding. This one centered on business. The final buyout of Amy's remaining shares in the north side of the property had hit a major roadblock. Matt, ever the businessman, had presented what he considered a fair, albeit firm, offer. He was looking at the numbers, the depreciation, the future investment required. His offer, sources allege, was significantly lower than what Amy believed her 30 years of sweat equity was worth. Amy, armed with an independent appraisal and a deep-seated feeling of being pushed out, was holding her ground. She refused to be lowballed on her own legacy. The negotiations became a tense stalemate. Lawyers exchanged letters. Phone calls between Matt and Amy grew clipped and strained. The tension was palpable, casting a shadow over all family interactions. Matt was growing increasingly frustrated, seeing Amy's stance as stubborn and emotional, while Amy saw Matt's offer as a final, insulting dismissal of her contributions. It was into this volatile environment that Caryn Chandler allegedly stepped. According to insiders, Matt had tasked Caryn with overseeing some initial clear-out work in the old farmhouse, preparing it for a potential massive renovation or even demolition. It was during this process on a dusty, quiet afternoon that Caryn ventured into the attic, and there, tucked away under a slanted eave, she found them. 3 cardboard boxes, clearly marked with the name Night. Curiosity piqued, she opened the top flap of one. She saw the old leather of a journal. She saw the edge of a stack of yellowed recipe cards. She saw a black and white photo of a smiling couple she vaguely recognized as Amy's parents. In that moment, a decent person would have felt a jolt of empathy. They would have immediately picked up the phone and called Amy, relieving the panic she was surely feeling. But according to the theory gaining traction in circles close to the family, Caryn did not see a collection of precious memories. She saw leverage. She saw a key to unlock the stalemate that was causing Matt so much stress and delaying their future plans for the farm. The connection was instantaneous and chillingly calculated. Amy wouldn't budge on the price for her shares, a business asset. But what about something personal, something priceless? Caryn closed the box, a plan beginning to form in her mind. She allegedly left the boxes exactly where they were, her discovery a secret she would weaponize. That evening, seeing Matt's frustration over another tense phone call with Amy, Caryn is said to have placed a comforting hand on his arm and said, "Honey, don't worry about Amy. Let me handle this. I think I know a way to get her to see reason and get this whole thing settled quickly." Matt, exhausted by the conflict and trusting his partner, reportedly agreed, assuming she meant she would use her softer touch, her female perspective, to persuade Amy. He had no idea what she was truly planning. He had no idea she was about to cross a line from business disagreement into outright emotional warfare. A few days later, Amy's phone rang. It was Caryn. Her tone was unnervingly sweet, almost syrupy. The conversation, as it has been relayed to us, started innocently. Caryn asked how Amy was settling in, a disingenuous pleasantry that immediately put Amy on guard. Then, Caryn played her first card. "Amy," she said, her voice dripping with faux concern, "I was doing a little cleaning in the attic of the old house, and you'll never guess what I found. Some of your mom's old things, journals and recipes and photos. I knew they must have been left by accident, and I just knew I had to call you. I know how much they must mean to you." Amy's heart leaped with a wave of immense relief. But it was immediately followed by a cold spike of suspicion. Why was Caryn calling about this? Why not Matt? Why did her voice sound so calculated? Before Amy could even formulate a plan to retrieve them, Caryn continued, her tone shifting subtly, linking the personal discovery to the business impasse with a cruel precision. You know, she mused as if the thought had just occurred to her. It's funny finding these now. With all the tension over this farm business, it really has everyone on edge. Matt is so stressed. There was a pause, a moment for the implication to hang in the air. And then came the veiled threat, the quid pro quo delivered in the language of friendly concern. If we could just get this farm business settled quickly and smoothly, accept the current offer and move on, I could make sure these boxes get back to you right away. I'd pack them in my own car and drive them over myself. Another pause. It would be such a shame if they got lost in all the chaos of the renovations we're planning. You know how contractors are. Things get thrown out, misplaced, especially in an old attic. The threat was unmistakable, yet cleverly deniable. It wasn't a direct, if you don't do this, you won't get them back. It was a manipulative suggestion, a poisoned offering. The message was clear: your memories for your shares. Accept the bad deal, and your mother's journals will be safe. Hold out for a fair price, and you may never see them again. For Amy, the world tilted on its axis. This was no longer a business negotiation, it was blackmail. She was being extorted with her own family history as the ransom. The relief she had felt moments before curdled into a nauseating mixture of rage and utter helplessness. She ended the call, her hand trembling, her mind reeling from the sheer cruelty of the proposition. She was emotionally cornered. Amy's first instinct was to fight back, to call a lawyer, to expose what was happening. But as she thought it through, the insidious genius of Caryn's scheme became apparent. What proof did she have? It was her word against Caryn's. There were no witnesses to the phone call. She couldn't even prove Caryn had the items. If she made a formal accusation, Caryn could simply deny everything. She could claim she never found any boxes, that a desperate Amy was making things up to gain leverage in the buyout, or worse, she could claim she did find them, but in the ensuing drama, the boxes simply disappeared. Thrown out by a careless worker, a tragic but unavoidable accident. The legal system couldn't help her with personal property that was technically abandoned on someone else's land. The police would dismiss it as a civil matter, a petty family squabble. She was trapped, devastated. She confided in Chris. His reaction was one of pure, unfiltered fury. He saw the emotional toll this was taking on Amy and was disgusted by the manipulative game being played. But he also recognized their powerlessness. He encouraged her to tell the kids, believing that family pressure might be the only tool they had left. Amy's call to her children was one of the most difficult she ever had to make, explaining that the memories of their grandmother, their family history, were being held as a bargaining chip by their father's partner was gut-wrenching. Zach and Molly were reportedly appalled, offering support but unsure of how to intervene in the complex dynamic between their parents. But for Jacob, the news hit differently. Jacob, the family's prodigal son, the one who had always walked his own path and spoken truth to power, felt a surge of protective rage. This wasn't about the farm or the show or the family business he had long since distanced himself from. This was a desecration. This was an attack on his mother and on the memory of his grandmother, Pat Knight, a woman he remembered with affection. The idea of her journals and recipes being used as a weapon by Caryn, a woman he had long been wary of, was a violation that he could not tolerate. He saw this not as a negotiation tactic, but as a monstrous act of emotional abuse. While the others counseled patience or caution, Jacob knew that direct action was the only answer. He wasn't going to let this stand. Without telling anyone his plan, he got in his truck and started driving towards the one place he knew he had to go, Roloff Farms. He was going to confront his father. Jacob arrived at the farm with a storm brewing in his eyes. He bypassed the new house Caryn and Matt shared, knowing he needed to find his father alone. He found Matt down by one of the barns, tinkering with a piece of equipment, lost in his own world of projects and plans. The confrontation was immediate, blunt. There was no small talk, no gentle lead-in. "Dad," Jacob said, his voice tight with controlled anger, "did you know what Caryn is doing? Did you know she is blackmailing Mom with Grandma Pat's journals?" Matt looked up, completely blindsided. His initial reaction was one of defensive denial. "What on earth are you talking about, Jacob? That's a horrible accusation. Caryn would never, ever do something like that. Amy must have misunderstood something." But Jacob stood his ground, his gaze unwavering. He wasn't there to debate. He was there to inform. "No, Dad, she didn't misunderstand." And then Jacob laid it all out, recounting the details of the phone call as Amy had told him. He repeated Caryn's sickly, sweet tone, her fake concern, and the final chilling proposition, tying the safe return of the heirlooms directly to Amy accepting the lowball offer. He used Caryn's exact words. It would be a shame if they got lost in all the chaos of the renovations. As Matt listened, the color drained from his face. He saw the raw, honest anger in his son's eyes. He heard the specific, manipulative phrasing, and a terrible realization began to dawn. He flashed back to Caryn's confident assurance just days earlier, "Let me handle this." He had thought she meant she would be a peacemaker. He never imagined she would resort to emotional extortion. The idea that Caryn was capable of such a thing, of weaponizing the memory of Amy's deceased mother against her, was horrifying to him. It was a line of cruelty he never thought possible, a betrayal not just of Amy, but of the basic decency he believed they both shared. In that moment, the business stalemate, the money, the farm, it all became secondary. A monstrous wrong had been committed, and he was, however unwittingly, complicit. Without another word to Jacob, Matt turned and stormed towards the old farmhouse, a place he now co-owned, but which was still filled with the ghosts of his past life. He burst through the door, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief and fury. He went straight to the attic, his heart pounding in his chest, praying his son was wrong. But there they were, tucked under the eave, exactly as the story went. 3 cardboard boxes, clearly marked night. He opened one and saw his former mother-in-law's handwriting. The proof was undeniable. The monstrous depth of Caryn's actions was laid bare in the dusty attic light. A wave of shame and anger washed over Matt Roloff. This was not business. This was not a negotiation. This was a profound moral failure happening under his roof. He didn't delegate. He didn't call anyone. He himself hoisted the heavy boxes into his arms. He carried each one down the narrow attic stairs, the weight of their contents feeling heavier than lead. He loaded them into his ATV and drove them not to his own house, but directly to his truck. He didn't even stop to confront Caryn yet. The need to right the wrong was too urgent. He personally drove the 20 minutes to Amy's new home, the boxes containing her soul sitting in the passenger seat beside him. When he arrived, he carried them to her door himself. The apology that followed was reportedly one of the most difficult and profuse of his life. He explained he had no idea, that he was horrified, and that there was no excuse for what had happened. For Amy, seeing Matt on her doorstep, boxes in hand with a look of genuine remorse on his face, was a moment of complex, conflicting emotions. There was the immense relief of getting her memories back, but also the deep, unsettling confirmation of just how far Caryn was willing to go. Matt's apology was a start, but the damage was done. The incident didn't just reveal a crack in the foundation of Matt and Caryn's relationship, it exposed a dark chasm that Matt never knew existed. and the fallout from this deeply personal betrayal was only just beginning to unfold. The boxes were safe, but the trust was shattered, perhaps forever. The drive back to Roloff Farms was the longest 20 minutes of Matt Roloff's life. The silence in his truck was deafening, a stark contrast to the hurricane of emotions raging within him. He was a man adrift in a sea of his own making. There was the blinding fury at Caryn for her deceit, for a level of cruelty he truly did not believe she possessed. But beneath the anger was a cold, creeping shame. How could he have been so blind? How could he have allowed the atmosphere on the farm to become so toxic that a scheme like this could even be conceived, let alone executed? He had given Caryn the reins, telling her to handle it, and in his willful ignorance, he had allowed her to nearly sever his family's final fragile threads. He wasn't just angry at her, he was profoundly disappointed in himself. The image of his son, Jacob, standing firm as the family's moral compass, was a searing indictment of his own leadership. He, the patriarch, the deal maker, the man with the plan, had been so focused on the business of the farm that he had failed to see the rot setting into its soul. By the time he pulled up to the house, he shared with Caryn, his anger had cooled into a hard, dense resolve. This was not going to be a shouting match. It was going to be a reckoning. Caryn was waiting for him, likely having seen his truck pull away from Amy's neighborhood on a tracking app, or perhaps just sensing the shift in the tectonic plates of their world. She met him at the door with a nervous smile, ready to ask how her plan had worked, expecting to hear that Amy had finally caved. But the look on Matt's face stopped her cold. It was a look she had never seen before, not in all their years as employer and employee, not in all their years as partners. It was a look of cold, utter disillusionment. He walked past her without a word, setting his keys down on the counter with a deliberate, heavy thud. He turned to face her, and the space between them felt like a canyon. "They're back with Amy," he said, his voice quiet, devoid of its usual bluster. "The boxes. I took them to her myself." Caryn's face went through a rapid series of micro-expressions: confusion, then dawning realization, then a flash of anger, quickly masked by practiced concern. "Matt, what are you talking about? Why would you do that? We were so close to a resolution. I was just trying to help you to get this done so we could move on." It was the justification he had dreaded, the confirmation that this was not a misunderstanding but a calculated plot. She truly believed her actions were warranted. "Help me?" Matt's voice rose, the quiet resolve cracking. "You call that helping me? You used Amy's dead mother as a bargaining chip, Caryn. You held her memories hostage. That's not a negotiation tactic. That's something a monster would do." The word monster hung in the air between them, ugly and undeniable. This is where our insider sources paint a picture of a confrontation that changed everything. Caryn, realizing her justification wasn't working, allegedly switched tactics to minimization and gaslighting. "Oh, Matt, don't be so dramatic. Amy is blowing this completely out of proportion, and you're letting her. They were just some old boxes in an attic. I was always going to give them back. I just thought it might speed things along for our sake. You've been so stressed." She tried to frame herself as the victim, the one who was only thinking of him, and Amy as the manipulative villain. She tried to make it about his loyalty, forcing him to choose a side. "And now you've run over there, playing the hero, taking her side against me. Again. Is that how it's always going to be, Matt? Every time she gets upset, you go running back." But for the first time, the old tactic didn't work. The spell was broken. Matt saw right through it. "My son," Matt said, his voice low and dangerous, "my son Jacob, had to come to me and tell me that his father's girlfriend was blackmailing his mother. Do you have any idea how that feels? Do you understand the damage you have done? This was never about your side or her side. There is a line of basic human decency, and you didn't just cross it, you pole vaulted over it and set fire to the bridge. I looked in those boxes, Caryn. I saw her mother's handwriting, and all you saw was leverage. According to the report, Matt then walked away, unable to even look at her any longer. He went into the guest room and closed the door, a physical barrier that represented the new, immense emotional distance between them. The Cold War on Roloff Farms had begun. In the days that followed, the house was filled with a suffocating silence. Caryn reportedly tried to apologize, to explain, to rationalize, but Matt was unreachable. He was reevaluating everything. He had built his future around this woman. He had alienated his family, sold off his legacy, and defended her at every turn. He had always seen her as his savvy, loyal partner, his rock. Now, he was forced to see her as something else, a person capable of profound emotional cruelty for personal gain. The trust, the fundamental belief he had in her character was shattered. He was living with a stranger. And as this personal crisis unfolded, the business of the farm buyout took an immediate and drastic turn. The stalemate was over. But Amy didn't have to concede a single dollar. In what sources describe as an act of pure penance, Matt contacted his lawyer with a new directive. He instructed him to draw up a new offer, one that met Amy's asking price. Not close to it, not a compromise, but her full number. He was no longer negotiating for a property. He was trying to buy back a piece of his own honor. He knew no amount of money could undo what Caryn had done, but it was the only tangible gesture he could make. It was an admission of guilt, a financial apology for an emotional crime. When the offer landed on Amy's lawyer's desk, she and Chris were stunned. It was a complete and total capitulation. Amy accepted. The business was finally, mercifully over. This decision, however, sent a shockwave through Matt and Caryn's already fractured relationship. For Caryn, this was the ultimate defeat. Not only had her plan backfired and exposed a side of her she wanted to keep hidden, but it had resulted in a massive financial loss for what she now considered their company. In her mind, Amy had won. Amy had manipulated Matt with her emotional drama and walked away with a huge payday. The resentment festered, creating another layer of poison in their partnership. Caryn's gamble for control had resulted in a total loss of it. She had lost the financial battle, and more importantly, she had lost her unquestioned influence over Matt. The ripple effects of the heirloom hostage crisis, however, went far beyond the farm's property lines. They reached every corner of the Roloff family, redefining relationships and hardening long-held resentments. For Jacob and Isabel, this was a watershed moment. Jacob, who had so often been painted as the disconnected, rebellious son, had emerged as the family's unlikely savior. He had been the one to speak the hard truth, to cut through the decades of dysfunction and force a moment of clarity. His bond with his mother, Amy, was cemented in a way it had never been before. She saw him not as her wandering boy, but as a man of deep integrity. The incident also fundamentally changed his relationship with Matt. The respect between them was now mutual. Matt no longer saw Jacob through a filter of past rebellion, but as the son who had held him accountable and, in doing so, saved him from a greater moral collapse. For Zach and Tori, the news of Caryn's actions was, according to those close to them, the point of no return. Zach had always harbored a deep-seated skepticism of Caryn's role in his parents' divorce and her subsequent takeover of his childhood home. He had tried, for the sake of his father, to maintain a cordial relationship. But this was a confirmation of his deepest fears. This was not a simple misstep. It was proof of a manipulative character that he could not and would not subject his own children to. Think about it. Viewers have long wondered about the true source of the intense animosity that grew between Zach and Matt, culminating in Zach and Tori's abrupt move to Washington. The on-screen arguments about the farm price never seemed to fully explain the depth of the rift. The show presented it as a business deal gone sour. But what if that was just the cover story? What if the real last straw was this secret off-camera incident? We believe this theory is the missing piece of the puzzle. Imagine Zach learning that Caryn had blackmailed his mother with his grandmother's cherished memories. His protective instincts for his mom, combined with his existing distrust of Caryn, would have created an unforgivable cocktail of anger and disgust. Sources speculate that Zach confronted Matt directly, not with the rage of Jacob, but with the quiet, disappointed finality of a son who had seen too much. The conversation would have been less about the blackmail itself and more about the future. Dad, how can we ever have a normal family Christmas? How can Tori and I bring our kids over to play in a house where we know this happened? Where do we know what she's capable of? The incident would have made it painfully clear to Zach that the farm was no longer a safe haven. It was enemy territory, presided over by a woman he could never trust. The dream of raising his own kids on Roloff Farms died at that moment, not because of a disagreement over money, but because the very moral fabric of the place had been torn apart. The move to Washington wasn't just a relocation, it was an escape. It was Zach putting a state line between his family and a dynamic he now viewed as irreparably toxic. Jeremy and Audrey, while more physically and emotionally removed from the daily farm drama, would have been equally appalled. Audrey, in particular, places an immense value on legacy, tradition, and the passing down of family heirlooms and stories. The idea of weaponizing those very things would be anathema to her entire brand and personal philosophy. This incident would have served as the ultimate confirmation for them that their decision to seek out their own separate farm was the right one. It proved that the original Roloff farm, the one they too had once dreamed of, was tainted by a drama they wanted no part of. It solidified their path, pushing them to create a new legacy, a clean one, far from the shadows of the old home. And then there's Chris Morick. Throughout this entire ordeal, he was Amy's rock. He was the one who saw her panic, who held her as she cried, and who felt a righteous fury on her behalf. According to our reports, Chris had to exercise immense self-control. His first instinct was to drive to the farm himself and confront both Matt and Caryn. But he knew that would only escalate the situation and put Amy in a more difficult position. Instead, he channeled his energy into supporting her, affirming her feelings, and helping her strategize. When Matt finally showed up on their doorstep with the boxes, Chris was there, a silent, powerful presence at Amy's side. He accepted Matt's apology on Amy's behalf, but made it clear through his demeanor that forgiveness would be a long and difficult road. This crisis, in a strange way, was the final trial by fire for their relationship. It proved to Amy, beyond any doubt, that she had a partner who would stand with her against anything, a protector who valued her emotional well-being above all else. It solidified their union, making the us of Amy and Chris stronger than ever before. In the long term, the hostage heirlooms incident left an indelible scar on Matt and Caryn's relationship. While they remained together, presenting a united front to the world in the television cameras, the foundation of their partnership was fundamentally altered. That perfect trust Matt once had in her was gone. A seed of doubt had been planted, and it would continue to grow in the dark. He would forever be looking at her through a new lens, wondering about her motives, questioning her sincerity. He had seen a glimpse of a ruthless strategist willing to inflict emotional pain for personal gain, and that was a vision he could never unsee. It would reportedly become the ghost in their relationship, the unspoken source of future arguments and tensions that would appear to viewers to come out of nowhere. Caryn, for her part, had learned a painful lesson. Her direct, aggressive power play had failed spectacularly. She had overplayed her hand and lost Matt's trust, the very thing that gave her power on the farm in the first place. From that point on, her strategy had to change. The overt manipulation was replaced by a more subtle, careful performance of the supportive, contrite partner. Her focus shifted from conquering the family to painstakingly trying to win back the trust of the man she had almost lost. She had to work tirelessly to repair the damage, to prove that the cruel blackmailer was an aberration, not her true self. But the question would always linger in Matt's mind and in the minds of his children. Which one was the real Caryn? So, as we look back at the tumultuous final years of the Roloff family on the farm, this behind-the-scenes story provides the explosive context that the show never could. It explains the sudden, almost generous resolution to the farm buyout. It provides the deep, personal motivation for Zach and Tori's exodus to another state. It illuminates the unshakable bond between Amy and Chris and the newfound respect between Matt and Jacob. More than any argument over money or property, this single alleged act of emotional blackmail was the cataclysmic event that shattered the Roloff family as we knew it. The heirlooms were returned, the shares were sold, and the contracts were signed. But the true cost of this buyout wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in broken trust, fractured relationships, and the haunting realization that in the battle for Roloff Farms, some were willing to hold even the most sacred memories hostage. The war for the land was over, but the war for the family's soul had left casualties that may never fully recover.